another year has passed. Crazy how that keeps happening. In keeping with the video I made last year, I'm going to be talking about the best and worst books I read this year, for your sake and also for posterity. I'm not going to say how many books I read this year, but it was plenty. So I had a pretty big selection to choose from, and I have lots to talk about. I'll throw up some stats here. Nothing super shocking. I still read a lot more fiction than nonfiction. Fantasy and queer books are still my top genres. Although literary got an edge in this year, I think, compared to last year, but still a little bit of everything. Some disclaimers, same as last time. I rate based on my own personal enjoyment and not on like a book's value to society or like how much I think people will like it. Books are also rated on different metrics. I think Carrie Can Read said that she rates books holistically, or she was ranking them holistically. So 5 stars is 5 stars for a completely different reason from another 5 stars, as you can see. Little me in the background. Everyone has their own opinions. You might not like a book that I did and vice versa. It's fine. It's not a big deal. This list is also not directly representative of the books that I rated the highest and lowest, because some books you rate 5 stars and they don't really stick with you. Some books you give 1 star, but it's not for like an interesting reason. It was just a boring book, so I don't want to talk about that because that won't be interesting. If you love something that I love, or hated something that I hated, or you read a book because of this video, please let me know. I'd love to talk about it. If you hated something that I love, keep it to yourself. It's fine. I can take it, but not that much. Unlike last year, this video is at least partially scripted, so hopefully this won't be as long as last year's, but I also think I have more books to talk about, so I don't know. There will be timestamps in the description if you want to skip around. With all that said, let's start with the best books of the year, roughly in the order that I read them. Our first book is My Friends by Fredrik Backman. I don't think Fredrik Backman can write a bad book. I've now read all of his full-length novels. He also has some novellas, which I haven't read all of. My Friends is for sure in my top 3. I think Beartown is still number 1. I was lucky enough to get an early copy, so it came out in May, but I read it in January. This is a contemporary novel about a girl who gets kind of obsessed with this famous painting and the story of the people that inspired it, which were these kids who were really close friends like 25 years earlier. In true Bachman fashion, it's absolutely like a screaming, crying, emotional roller coaster. Bachman does these little fake out things where you think the story is going to go one way or has gone one way, but it really went a different way, and it takes it just far enough every time that I fall for it every time, and I kind of love that. Some people probably find that annoying, but I love it. He has a really specific like narrative voice that I'm sure some people don't like, but I love it. I like that it's very feels like a storyteller is telling you this. It's not just this kind of nebulous omniscient narrator. If you liked his other books, you'll like this one, and if you just like complex, emotional, coming-of-age type stories, I think this will also be up your alley. I don't think I like this more than Beartown, but it's up there for sure. Next is Crash Test by Amy James. Coming very frankly out of left field, this book is a contemporary queer F1, like Formula One romance. This is another early copy. I don't dislike contemporary romance, and I read it fairly regularly, but it's rarely like amazing. It's usually like good. Last year, 7 Days in June was the exception, and this year it's Crash Test. This follows 2 race car drivers, 2 Formula One drivers, Travis and Jacob, who've been in a relationship in secret for a year because neither of them are ready to come out. Somewhat similar setup to Heated Rivalry for fans of that. I know the show has brought a lot more attention to that series. But the story in the book really starts with Jacob getting into like a really bad crash, actually during a race, which puts his life at risk and throws a wrench into their relationship. It's not like a traditional romance in terms of the narrative arc, because they actually spend most of the book broken up. But there's such like great tension and character development. In the beginning, you have the struggle because obviously Travis wants to visit Jacob in the hospital, but no one knows that they're like even friends. Like people don't know that they're more than acquaintances even, let alone partners. So it's kind of weird, and Jacob's family is really shitty, but also, like, understandably weirded out by this, like, random guy, as far as they can tell, who keeps trying to visit their son and take visiting time, like, away from them and stuff. Both of them, but Jacob in particular, are flawed and have to put real work into growing before they can come back together. I don't usually like third act breakups because it's never convincing to me that the characters really understand what they did wrong over the course of like the 20 pages that those usually happen. This book is basically one big third act breakup, but I loved it. It actually works when it's longer. And you end up really rooting for them as individuals as well as a couple. Plus the side characters are really well rendered and have like a genuine impact on the story. Unconventional romance, but if you like your romance angsty, this is for you. Okay, Sky Daddy by Kate Folk. You're just gonna have to bear with me on this one, because it is insane, but I'm such a big defender of this book. I don't care, it was great. People have been hearing me talk about this for like the whole year and complaining. This is kind of a weird girl lit fic book about a woman named Linda who works as a social media moderator. When she isn't at work, Linda finds no better way to unwind than by going to the airport and indulging in her deep attraction to commercial airplanes. And this prompts many questions, I know. One, is it sexual? Yeah, of course. But it's not only sexual, because Linda's ultimate dream is to one day be eternally bonded to one of her stunning steel suitors in that holy matrimony we call a plane crash. So she wants to marry one of the planes by dying in a plane crash. Glad we're on the same page. Second question, it's all planes, but it is also one particular plane, and also anything related to planes. So like she kind of wants to date a pilot because she knows that's like more normal. I love this book. I don't care. It's funny, it's dark, and it really commits to the premise, which not all, especially like in like the weird girl lit fic kind of subgenre, a lot of them just don't commit to the bit, and I don't respect it. Linda is sexually and romantically attracted to planes. It's not a metaphor, as in it's not a direct stand-in for a person or something. She's just like a mentally ill weirdo. And that's the other thing about this book, is that it's actually a really well done exploration of mental illness. I know that's shocking, but I've read a lot of books that are ostensibly about mental illness, but I like how Linda kind of knows that there's something wrong with her and that she's different. So she pushes people away because she knows that there's this huge part of her that they cannot share. She can't share it with them. She knows that this is weird and she can't be vulnerable about it. And it's such a huge part of her life. Usually isolation and self-destruction are depicted as unconscious. And then once the character realizes that they're isolating and self-destructing, they stop and they're magically fixed. Like, that's the issue. They just didn't know what they were doing. Linda knows. And truly the obstacle is finding someone who can understand or look past her obsession and who won't take advantage of it, which we also see in the story. No spoilers. I love the ending so much. If the premise sounds interesting, pick it up. I know it's weird. I think it's great. Next is Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I haven't really liked Taylor Jenkins Reid's other books that I've read. Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is just okay. I have my issues with it. I hate the ending. And Daisy Jones and the Six, I read it this year and I was like, this is stupid. I was like, I don't care about straight people cheating on each other. I'm sorry. I don't care about Fleetwood Mac. I did the full cast audiobook. I could not give a shit. Atmosphere, for me, totally knocked it out of the park. It's a queer historical fiction novel set mostly in the 80s. About a woman named Joan who leaves her job as a college professor and joins the ASCANs, or astronaut candidates, at NASA with the goal of becoming one of the first female astronauts. There she meets Vanessa, another candidate, and they become really close and develop a secret relationship. I really love stories about like space agencies specifically, like not sci-fi about astronauts in general, but specifically about like NASA and Roscosmos and like all those things on Earth and like the historical thing, like Hidden Figures kind of stuff. There's a series that I'll mention later that has a similar setting because those missions are so dangerous and high stakes, but there's also all these politics and funding problems. It's a great way to have your cake and eat it too, in terms of having realistic, as in like non-fantasy, non-science fiction stories, but with the tension and high stakes of speculative fiction. Jonah and Vanessa and a lot of the peripheral characters are really well developed. I like all the drama that Jonah's going on with her family and all the different kinds of relationships that she has going on with people at NASA. It must be said that this book made me sob for like 20 minutes. Full on ugly crying, oh my god, at the end. I think it maybe dragged at points, which is maybe just because TJR's writing isn't all the way for me, but that ending is just killer. And I'm glad she's doing queer historical fiction again, because Seven Husbands was such a miss for me. And I think there's a lack of queer historical fiction, particularly with female main characters. Overgrowth by Mira Grant. Mira Grant, aka Shauna Maguire. Mira Grant is a pen name of Shauna Maguire, if you don't know. She's just an amazing author. This was another early copy. In fact, all of the books so far in this video have been early copies. The next one isn't, but I'm truly blessed. This is a sci-fi novel with pretty light horror elements. It got marketed as horror, but I agree with the reviews. They were like, that's a stretch. It's not really. And it follows Anastasia Miller, who, since she was a toddler, compulsively has introduced herself to everyone as an alien disguised as human. Like, she tells them, like, I'm an alien from another planet, and I'm disguised as human, and we're gonna come take over. And she cannot stop it. She can't control this impulse. No one believes her. They just think she's weird. But suddenly, the alien homeworld that she comes from is on its way to Earth, and no one can say that she didn't warn them. I love this book so much. Past me, when I was writing the script, like, went back and looked at the lines that I had highlighted, and I was, like, crying. It's so good. The art to this book is so frustrating and beautiful, and it's all spoiler territory, but, like, she warned them, you know? Like, no one can say. She told everyone in her life. It was always the first thing she said to people, and some people became her friends anyway. Her friends are one of the highlights of the book, but no one believed her. And then it's too late. The main character is literally an alien, but it's such a human-feeling book with all of this humor and beauty and folly and idiocy, honestly, that goes with that. Shauna Maguire really tugs at my heartstrings, and also always features really diverse, well-researched characters. This is kind of a low average rating on Goodreads, which a lot of these books do, actually, but I think it's amazing. Notes on an Execution by Dania Kukafka. I am not beating the allegations that I only read depressing books. Holy shit. This is a literary thriller, kinda, about a serial killer on death row, but the story is told from the perspectives of all the women in his life, many of whom narrowly avoided becoming one of his victims. It's just a really poignant critique of this idea of, like, the charming psychopath serial killer, and also of the media's fascination with stories about men hurting women, despite that being common. Like, it's horrible, but it happens all the time. There's a great quote, which I will just read directly so as not to butcher it. For context, Ansel is the serial killer. The quote is, "There are millions of men out there who want to hurt women. People seem to think that Ansel Packer is extraordinary because he actually did." And I still think about that all the time. The writing is really great, but this idea of writing about one of these charming serial killers while also decentralizing him, it's just really effective. Through the eyes of his mother and his wife's sister and the detective, you come to understand Ansel, not in the sense that you empathize with him because he is just a fucking monster and did horrible things for horrible reasons, but in the sense that you, like, understand how pathetic he is, honestly. Being a serial killer doesn't mean that you ascend to godhood. It doesn't even mean that you matter at the end of the day. He's just another man in a cage waiting to die. I cried so much, particularly at the end, and then just stared at the wall for a while. Shout out to my friend who has just read this and told me that they also cried and then stared at the wall for a while, because I think this book just makes you do that. It's not some wild or super complex take to say we shouldn't deify men for killing women, but the story makes that point perfectly and beautifully and so smoothly. Rose House by Arkady Martine. I read this like 2 days after Notes on an Execution, and it is super different and totally blew me away for, like, not even vaguely related reasons. I love Arkady Martine's series that starts with A Memory Called Empire. I'm not going to attempt to say the actual name of the series because it is hard to pronounce. And Rose House is nothing like that, but it does confirm to me that she's just operating on a whole other wavelength. This is a sci-fi horror novella, maybe thriller, about this big weird house called Rose House that is haunted by the AI that is embedded into it. It was constructed by this eccentric, super famous architect who, upon his death, leaves the house to his former protege, who he hasn't been in contact with for years, and they're not on good terms. And there are all these rules. She's the only one who can enter the house at all, and she can only do so for like a week each year total, and it's all enforced by the AI. That's all weird, but fine until the AI calls the police, because it has to, and says that there's a dead body in the house. Obviously, this brings up the question of how did the dead person get in the house if no one can enter it? Who killed them if no one can enter the house? And it just gets super weird. It's not really a murder mystery, thank God, because I hate those. And I think that's kind of a misinterpretation of the book. What it is strange and mind-bending and chilling, but it's beautiful and it's so unique. You know, this isn't really a spoiler, but just to give you an example of the weirdness at play, there's a bit where the detective, to enter the house, has to convince the AI that she is not a person, but an entity of the local police department. Like, she is representing the department and therefore is no longer human, and that, you know, surpasses the rule that humans can enter, because she's not human. She's the police department. And the AI, like, lets her in, but not because it believes her, but because she's, like, willing to give up her humanity, kind of. I don't know. It's all very weird, but it's super cool. And it's a novella, so it's not a big commitment. If you liked Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, this might be your jam. The God of Endings by Jacqueline Holland. Despite fantasy being my most read genre in general, and also this year specifically, there isn't actually a lot of fantasy on this list. There was a lot of duds, but this is one of them. Shout out to the person who recommended it to me, because it is fantastic. This is a gothic fantasy with historical sections and horror elements about a vampire born in, I think, rural France in like the early 1800s, who got up to a lot of stuff, but in the present she runs a fine arts, like, French immersion preschool in upstate New York, and she's mostly content with her life, and she knows how to deal with her hunger, until she starts being hungry all the time. This has never happened before the whole time she's been alive. She cannot stop being hungry, no matter how much she drinks. And she worries about being able to control herself, especially since she's working with children. The person who recommended this book to me said it was like The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, but with vampires. And I think that's a solid comparison, but The God of Endings is a lot darker and philosophical in kind of an interesting way. First of all, the writing is fantastic, like genuinely so amazing. I don't usually notice a book like for its writing. I'm not super picky about that, but the writing's so addictive. Like, every time I was away from the book, I like wanted to go back just like to enjoy the writing. You go back to all these moments in Colette, who's the main character, in her life and in the past, and the settings are so different and they're all interesting in their own ways. And in the present, she's dealing with this hunger, and one of her students has kind of weird stuff going on at home, and Colette is waking up in weird places covered in blood. Like, it's just great. Gothic fantasy, they all kind of blend together for me for the most part, and I don't like a lot of the tropes that you find in the Gothic genre, like dream sequences I hate. But everything just works in this book. Like, I ate it up, despite it not being my kind of book. Shark Heart by Emily Havoc. Another sad one, guys. I don't know what to tell you. If you're here for joy, you've come to the wrong place. Shark Heart is a literary magical realism novel about a newlywed couple, Lewis and Ren. Lewis is diagnosed with a condition just a few weeks into their marriage that will gradually turn him into a great white shark. In this world, these diseases that transform people into animals are like a known thing. They're not super common, but like they happen. And the shark variant is like particularly uncommon. You then follow their experience as Ren becomes Lewis's caregiver, and Lewis becomes increasingly dangerous to her. And you also get insights into Ren's experience growing up because her mother had a similar condition, and then Ren was also kind of forced into the role of caregiver for her mother. It's kind of a funny idea, but this book is absolutely devastating. It's really a monument to all the caregivers out there who have experienced trauma or been put in danger, or just had to give up everything to take care of a loved one. I wouldn't say the whole turning into an animal thing is directly analogous to any one condition, but you see aspects of cancer and dementia and even maybe bipolar disorder, other mental illnesses. It's beautiful and kind of hard to read, like emotionally at points, but it speaks to the skill of the author that this kind of outlandish premise can ring so true to the reality. There are a lot of potentially triggering topics in this one, so be aware, but if you like your book sad, this one's hard to beat. She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan, or really the duology, both books. Some books you love in the moment and then they don't stick with you. This one is kind of the opposite, where I liked it but didn't love it in the moment, but it really stuck with me. This is a queer historical fantasy. The fantasy elements are pretty light, but they're there, set in 1300s China, about Zhu, who was born a girl, but when their brother dies, they take on his name and identity to fulfill this prophecy of greatness that was assigned to the brother, but then he's dead. I'm going to use they them pronouns for this character, not because those pronouns are used for Zhu in the book, but because their identity doesn't fit squarely into any contemporary queer identity, and going with he or she wouldn't feel quite right. Zhu Chongba joins a monastery to escape the famine and ends up tangled up in all of this political intrigue and just insanity. The series is so amazing, and it feels so unique for a lot of reasons. On the surface, the plot is so gripping, it's twisty, there's so many of these like wild dramatic moments, and I eat those up. What really stands out to me though are the characters. You get a few different perspectives across both of the books, and the author has just done a really masterful job of characterization, because you see how characters think and feel about themselves, and then you see how other characters think and feel about them. And there's often a really big and fascinating disconnect that itself tells you a lot about each character. Zhu's ambition kind of comes through in their POV, but it comes through way more intensely in Ma's POV, which is great, because then we don't just see Zhu thinking to themselves about how ambitious they are over and over. I'm going to be talking about that when we get to the Poppy War and the honorable mentions, so keep that in mind. I also really like how queerness is represented in the series, because it doesn't feel like the author just shoved contemporary queer identities into this totally different setting. We know historically that queer people have always existed, but not in the same form as queer identities today necessarily. And all of the characters in the series are queer in ways that contextually make sense for the period and the circumstances. It feels wrong to me to say that Zhu Chongba is a trans man or trans mask, because there are points when they reveal their biological sex or privately identify as a woman as a form of intimacy. It also doesn't feel like a Milan situation where this is just a woman dressed up as a man, because Zhu says that they don't feel like only a woman. Their relationship, which I won't spoil who it's with, but it feels kind of distinctly sapphic. So their identity is really complex and interesting in that way. Of course, all of the drama and angst in the series appeal to me, but I also think that a lot of fantasy kind of hits on the same themes over and over, and this one really departs from that. Usually it's like family and imperialism and xenophobia and honor and power and class struggles and all that. And this series has elements of those themes, but also people's relationships to their bodies, shame, sex, self-destruction, and self-destruction in general. Super good, really entertaining, really unique. Hench by Natalie Zena Walshot. Thinking about this book just makes me smile. I actually just reread it, and it's great. This is a urban sci-fi fantasy, whatever you consider superheroes to be, novel about Anna, who is a temp worker for supervillains, or at least that's what she does until an encounter with a superhero leaves her really horribly injured, and she starts doing the math and challenging the public's view of superheroes as heroes. In my review, I said that this book was diabolical, and it so is. It's a silly premise, temp workers for supervillains, and there is a lot of humor, but man, it gets so much darker than you expect. I love when you get these amazing, lovable characters and then just have to watch them get the shit beat out of them over and over. This is so fun and inventive and fucked up. I love Anna and all of the side characters and all of the systematic infrastructure that makes the heroes look good and disguises the harm that they do. It's always been kind of a joke about like all of the property damage that Superman does, but seriously, is it worth saving that loved one when you've destroyed people's homes and killed that guy whose car you threw haphazardly at the bad guy? This is the first in an unfinished series, and the second book comes out next year. I was lucky enough to get an early copy, which I have already read, and I'm so happy to be back in this world. The second book is really different from the first one, but I'm really happy with where the series is going. It's not a book for everyone, to be sure, but it feels like it was made like in a lab for me. The Husbands by Holly Gramazio. This is another kind of premise-forward book that sounded super interesting, but the reviews were kind of mixed, so I was a little worried, but I think it was really well done. This is a humor, magical realism novel about Lauren, who comes home to her apartment after a girls' night out and finds her husband Michael waiting for her. Only problem, she doesn't have a husband, she's single, and she's never seen this man in her life. But there are photos of them together on the walls, and he knows all this stuff about her, and her friends are like, yeah, your husband Michael, of course it's Michael. She's still kind of trying to adjust to whatever's going on when Michael goes up into the attic to fix a light bulb, and a new husband comes down in his place. Such a fun premise. I know I said this was humor, but all of the husbands are different, and the genre of the book kind of shifts sometimes with the husband, so there are actually some really tense, dark moments in this. One reason I'm a defender of this book is that I think it's a really hard premise to work with on the writer's end. The husbands only switch if they go into this one attic, so the setting is largely bound to that apartment. You can leave it, but you always have to come back to it. Also, with the nature of the husband switching, it's hard for the husbands individually to feel like really complex characters because you don't get that much time with them. So there's more work for the author to do to make some of them at least seem really human or just like really interesting so that the reader can get invested in them. It's also a premise built on repetition like you see with time loop stories, and some of the reviews said that it got repetitive or it went on too long. I don't agree. I think Gramazio managed to really do a lot with a lot of limitations and establish compelling characters and stakes, despite there being this kind of do-over mechanism that could take the stakes out of a book that was less well done. It was funny, at points it was stressful, but it doesn't feel like any other book, and that's always a big point in favor for me. Girl Dinner by Olivia Blake. The girls that get it, get it. I've found Olivia Blake's books to be a little hit or miss, but mostly hit. And despite the gimmicky title, this really blew me away. It was a big surprise. Girl Dinner is a horror/thriller which follows two women. Nina, a college sophomore, attempting to join the House, which is a super exclusive sorority that incomparably produces successful women. And the other woman is Sloane, who's a new mother, struggling with her frankly very incompetent husband, her new job, and all the pressure that's put on women to be like perfect mothers. This book really packs like an ideological punch, which you might not expect going into it. Narratively, it's not super shocking, but there's so much discussion surrounding feminism, particularly in regards to the question of like, if feminism means that women can and should do what they want, is it productive or feminist for women to still choose traditional gender roles or promote misogynist ideologies? There's a whole plot line with the tradwife influencer, which was just chilling. Apparently tradwife influencers were a thing for me this year. Well, you'll see what I mean when we get to the last book in the best list. There are a lot of scenes of characters just talking, but it's heart-pounding because it's really getting into some like philosophical depth. It's also a testament to Blake's writing that you can really feel the hunger in this book, like the desire that Sloane and Nina have to emulate these women who seem to have it all figured out, and the desire for inclusion in these kind of sacred circles. I want to read this bit directly from my review, where I said, "This book feels closely entangled with girlhood and womanhood and all of the conflict and beauty and misogyny that surrounds those experiences, and yet the narrative arc feels distinctly non-gendered because it is fundamentally a story of power, loss, inclusion, and sacrifice, all fundamental to womanhood but familiar to personhood." A lot of people didn't like this book, but it just worked for me. I don't care. I also really liked Gifted and Talented by Olivia Blake this year, but it just barely didn't make the honorable mentions list. The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. This book single-handedly motivated me to read a ton of horror towards the end of the year, which used to be like one of my favorite genres, but I haven't read a ton in recent years. This is a moderately extreme horror/thriller about a house inside of which lives a man, a cat, and a girl who isn't allowed to leave. I can't really say more about the plot because I think it's best to go into this mostly blind, but wow. I didn't really know what this was about going into it. Like, I kind of thought it was a different book, and that I think actually was a great way of reading it. I've read 2 more Catriona Ward books since this one, and one thing is that she's always going to have some truly unique forms of child abuse. Goddamn, it's disturbing, it's shocking. I read enough that I usually guess twists, and I guessed like half of the twist, but she really got me with that second bit. They're also the good kind of twists that make you think back on scenes earlier in the book and realize what was really happening with like brand new horror. It's also one of those rare horror novels that feels like it has real care and sympathy for its characters. The author talks about this in the afterword, but this was originally a very different story, probably more like what you would expect, but she found herself kind of second-guessing how one of the characters was depicted, and changing that really made for a completely different story. I know I'm being super vague, but I think this is a must-read if you like horror, and I would also love to talk about it with someone who has already read it. We Used to Live Here / The Caretaker by Marcus Cleower. The Caretaker doesn't come out until 2026, like later in 2026, but I got an early copy and it felt impossible not to include it alongside We Used to Live Here because they're both amazing, and also The Caretaker confirmed a lot about how I felt about We Used to Live Here. We Used to Live Here is a horror novel, kind of a classic. There's something off about this house story about Charlie and Eve, who are a queer couple who flip houses. They score this big, beautiful house kind of in the middle of nowhere. And one day, when they're working on it, a family comes to the door, and the father claims that he used to live in the house when he was a kid, and he would like to show the family around his childhood home. One of the kids runs off. Eve is having trouble getting a hold of Charlie on the phone, and it all goes left from there. The Caretaker follows Macy, a young woman who is struggling to make ends meet for her and her sister after their father's death, leading her to accept a mysterious and extremely well-paid position as the character of an isolated house in the Oregon wilderness. With the job comes a very bizarre list of rules that Macy must follow to the letter or risk a fate worse than death. Obviously, these are by the same author, but they're also set in the same world, which is important because there's a lot more to We Used to Live Here than the book itself. In the book, there's Morse code and other hidden messages and links to websites that you can actually go to, which are all a part of this ongoing ARG or alternate reality game. It's kind of hard to explain what an ARG is if you don't know, but it's kind of like a digital escape room where people collaborate to collect and interpret clues, which are usually hidden in videos or text or images, and usually there's some kind of creepy narrative underlying the whole thing. Marcus Cleower used to be a popular poster on r/NoSleep, which is the horror subreddit, and he's set up these books as pieces in a bigger ARG puzzle. I didn't know any of that going into We Used to Live Here, and honestly the book is great even if you don't bother with any of that and ignore the codes. He has a way of writing these super subtle but really like cinematic psychological horror scenes, and I just love them. Neither of the books feel like your average haunted house story. They feel like more. They make you curious. I read most of We Used to Live Here and all of The Caretaker in broad daylight. And I was jumping at like every leaf that flew by the window. I was freaked out, which doesn't usually happen to me. There are two other things that I really appreciate about Marcus Cleore specifically. The first is that he's writing truly bone-chilling horror without rape and animal cruelty, without copious gore and child abuse and suicide, etc., etc. I don't mind that stuff in horror, but it does feel cheap sometimes, because of course that's disturbing. So it speaks to his skill that he doesn't need to put in stuff for shock value. The second is that both of these books have queer female main characters that are just normal people. They aren't fetishized or brutalized or quirky or just like offensive. They feel like normal people. I know some people will say that's the bare minimum, but it's a bare minimum that for some reason the majority of male authors out there just can't accomplish, which makes it low-key not the bare minimum. You get it. I'm a big fan. I know The Caretaker isn't even out yet, but I am on the edge of my seat waiting for whatever he puts out next. An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green, which is the first in the Carl's duology. I knew that Hank Green wrote a fiction series, but it wasn't super on my radar, and I didn't totally know what it was going into it. So if that's you, oh my god, you need to pick these up. This is a sci-fi, maybe young adult, but not overtly. It doesn't feel super, like, juvenile. It's about April, who sees this big freaky statue on the street in New York City, and mistaking it for some art piece takes like a video with it where she names it Carl. Little does she know that other Carls popped up spontaneously in cities all over the world minutes before she stumbled across that one. And being one of the first people to notice it, she immediately rockets into like stardom as the mystery of the Carls kind of unfolds and these political divisions arise. The fact that this book was written and published before COVID is actually insane, because it totally mirrors some of the political mess that went down. It's a fun, funny, joyful book, but there is kind of this descent to the narrative as the pressure on April to be a political figurehead increases. Maybe the Carls aren't dangerous, but they make people afraid, and people are dangerous when they're afraid. You can also clearly see how Hank Green's own experiences and maybe anxieties about being a public figure manifest in the story, and I find that terrifying, honestly. Also, the end of the first book made me cry like a lot, and the second book picks up right on the coattails of the first. It's such a compelling story. I really kind of fell in love with it like right away. The last book on my list of the best books I read in 2025 unfortunately comes out in 2026, and that is Yesteryear by Carol Claire Burke, which will come out in April. Man, this is a literary thriller, maybe with speculative elements. It's kind of hard to categorize, about Natalie Heller-Mills, a tradwife influencer with a beautiful, perfect life on a charming farm, with a boisterous family and an extremely successful Instagram account, or at least she had all of those things, until the day she wakes up on a dreary, dangerous homestead, surrounded by a family she doesn't recognize, having truly been transported into the past. I told you we would be coming back to the tradwife influencers. A tradwife wakes up in 1800s and has to practice what she preaches. Really, what could be more satisfying, right? But this isn't a simple story at all. If you've ever looked at some right-wing extremist or a woman who's proudly misogynistic and you wonder, what led you here? This is a story about that kind of ideological dissent. And Natalie's a fascinating character, like extremely flawed and chock full of contradictions. The emotional volatility of the story cannot be overstated. It's really a roller coaster, and these extreme emotions are so vivid. I kind of got to the end a little bitter that the author got me to sympathize with and pity this like deeply terrible but also deeply troubled person. It's not just about misogyny, because obviously the far right's interpretation of traditional values is really closely intertwined with religion and sex and social capital and politics in like the concrete sense. Like there are characters who are politicians in the story. Traditional values go hand in hand with white supremacy as well, which is maybe my only like big critique of this book, because it's kind of barely touched on. Like it's very peripherally alluded to Whereas I think of that as like a central tenet of this ideology. I don't know the author's race. It's entirely possible that she felt she couldn't speak to that and didn't want to speak over people of color. But if you are familiar with and critical of these traditional values, this kind of ideology, it is kind of a glaring hole maybe in the story. I already know some people won't like the ending. I loved it. I don't think it could have ended any other way. If nothing else, it's a propulsive read, like so compelling, hard to take your eyes away from. So go ahead, put it on your list for next year, because I think it's going to be big. I was right last year that The Favorites was going to be big, and I think I'm right about this one too. Those are all the best books I read this year. Take a break, get a snack, and we'll jump into my honorable mentions. These are books that I really liked and that in some way it would be hard to exclude from this list completely, but they weren't like perfect or new favorites. I would still recommend them all for sure, but maybe some of them with some caveats. Still, I want people to know about them or know about how I feel about them. So let's get into it. A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Starting off with a tough one here. Everyone has opinions on this book, I know, and you'll be shocked to learn that I too have opinions on this book. This follows 4 men who meet in college and eventually end up living in New York, and you get plenty of insight on all of them, but in particular Jude, who despite being close friends with the rest of them, is kind of extremely mysterious and very private. He has a physical disability and quite severe mental health issues, and as the story unfolds and we progress through their lives, they face misfortune and big life changes, and more of Jude's traumatic background is revealed, even as he continues to experience new traumas. I like this book. I think the writing is super engaging considering how dense it is, and I like sad books, so I am into the unending devastation. More than anything, I think I'm just defensive of this book, not because I think it's perfect or because it's like my favorite book ever, but because I think most of the common criticisms are like kind of stupid. For one, a lot of people say it's just like too sad and made them feel bad. And that's a valid reason to not like the book if you don't like sad books, but it's not a problem with the book. It's a matter of preference. Some other people say it's trauma porn or it's unrealistic that all of this horrible stuff could happen to one person, which I think is like kind of offensive. I think it's kind of mean. I haven't by no means suffered to the extent that Jude does, but we have some overlap. I've had similar mental health issues. I have chronic pain in my legs and chronic conditions. And if you think it's unrealistic for someone to have more than one horrible struggle in their life, for one, that's just incorrect. And it also doesn't take into account the extent to which trauma is cumulative. One childhood trauma, possibly that involves a permanent physical injury, can lead to addiction and isolation and other self-destructive behaviors, which can easily lead to more mental and physical trauma. This is a character study of a person for whom just about everything went wrong, and that's kind of the point. Another criticism is that it's weird or harmful for Yanagihara to impart such trauma on Jude since he's a gay man and she isn't a part of that community. I might agree with this, except I think that saying that Jude is a gay man is kind of a misreading of the story. I don't think Jude is attracted to men. The only relationships he ends up in are with men, but one is with someone who he cares about a lot as a friend and who wants to be in a relationship with him, even though Jude finds the non-platonic aspects of their relationship extremely unpleasant and triggering. And the other is a man who he engages with as a form of self-destruction and to relive his trauma. I don't think Jude is attracted to women either, but he only says that he can't imagine being with a woman because of his traumatic experiences. It's funny to say Jude isn't gay, he's traumatized, but I think that's kind of true. And I think it takes steam out of the criticism that Hanya Yanagihara is just using this little gay guy as a punching bag. It's a unique and divisive and kind of wildly engaging story, and it won't be for everyone, and that's fine. But just because you didn't enjoy it, or it made you feel hard emotions, doesn't mean that there's something wrong with the book. City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert. Very different energy. I picked this up totally on a whim during a Kindle sale, not even realizing that it was by the author of Eat, Pray, Love, which is very famous nonfiction. I just thought it looked interesting, and I was right. City of Girls is a historical fiction about a young woman named Vivian who is kicked out of college in the 1940s, and for some reason that I cannot imagine, to straighten her out, her parents send her to live with her aunt, who owns like a raunchy, like low-bar theater in New York City, like a vaudeville theater. There, she comes of age, surrounded by all these kind of glittering, flamboyant characters, gets engaged in scandal, falls in love, and just gets mixed up in a whole bunch of mess. It's funny, it's emotional, it's bold. I saw a review that called it boring, and I have so much trouble understanding that, because so much happens in this book. I think it captured a feeling I've wanted to find, but largely missed out on in historical fiction. These kind of glittering eras and larger-than-life characters. I went into books like The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and A Gentleman in Moscow looking for that and didn't find it, but City of Girls gets a lot closer for me. It's a real emotional roller coaster, and it takes kind of a hard left turn at the end tonally in maybe like the last third. But I actually really liked that, and I think it ended the story on a more heartfelt note. It's also nice to see historical books with more diverse casts, especially at this period in New York in the theater scene. It would have been ridiculous to have an all-white cishet cast. It's just a good time, and the vibe in particular really stuck with me. The Lady Astronaut series by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is an ongoing series with 4 books out, starting with The Calculating Stars. It's an alternate history sci-fi series in which, in 1952, a huge meteorite fell on Washington, D.C., throwing a lot of the world's politics into kind of a tailspin, and also massively increasing the rate of climate change. Following this, the need to settle on other planets becomes much more apparent, and a lot more funding is poured into space exploration than was in, real history. And Elma York, who is one of the protagonists and a calculator at NASA, fronts the movement to get women into space. It's very reminiscent of Hidden Figures, kind of vibes-wise, and also because Elma York is a calculator, which is the same as the job of the women in Hidden Figures, but there is a significant sci-fi lean. There are certain series that aren't perfect, but just kind of bring you such joy, and this is one of them for me. Obviously, it's an empowering story for women, but also for people of color and queer people later in the series. As mentioned when I talk about atmosphere, I love the stakes of stories surrounding contemporary or past space exploration, and this series really gets into the weeds of all of the politics and infighting. It almost reads like political intrigue, especially later on, because there's a power vacuum in the US and a group of extremists that develop after the meteor, and there's disputes between countries, and obviously all of the work done by Elma and her colleagues to get women and people of color into space. Mary Robinette Kowal clearly does a ton of research for these books, including featuring portions of real articles at the beginning of the chapters, and she also includes a lot of mental health and disability representation. It's not perfect for me because the plots of the individual books tends towards kind of mystery narratives, which I don't really like, but there's enough that I do like that I don't really care, and obviously, if you like mysteries, that should actually be a point in favor for you. So I highly recommend the series. Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. Both of the books in this duology. This duology is so weird. It's great. This is a young adult fantasy 2-book series that follows Laszlo Strange, an orphan who works in this great, big, wondrous library, who's become obsessed with this lost city called Weep since he was a child. When travelers come, claiming to be from Weep, he joins them to solve some mysterious problem that was the reason that the city was lost. Also, he keeps having dreams about a blue girl. There wasn't really a better way to slot in that piece of information, but it is important. Giant libraries, lost cities, dreams, all that kind of stuff. Exquisite vibes, really, and a great cast of characters, some twists. One thing that I like is that the first book and the second book feel totally different from each other. It almost changes genres completely. Laszlo and Sarai, which I think is how her name is pronounced, are fine, but the side characters really are the stars of the show for me. Errol Fane and Thayon and Minya, oh my god, are much more flawed characters and have way more interesting arcs in my opinion. Minya in particular god tier character arc. I eat that stuff up. It made me so emotional. I will say that the romance isn't bad, but it's weird in a way that's kind of hard to pin down for me. It's kind of more sexual than you would expect a YA romance to be, but sexual in like the way that an older person might imagine a younger person's sexual experience, like kind of almost uncomfortably sentimental. I don't really know how else to explain it. Maybe it's just me, who knows. It's one of the better fantasy series I've read recently, but it's definitely not like your average fantasy series. Red Rabbit by Alex Grecian. This one was a very pleasant surprise, and it's just a really cool book. There's not really a better way to describe it. Red Rabbit is a horror western that follows a whole bunch of perspectives, but mainly Sadie Grace, who's a woman who is wanted for witchcraft. There's Tom, who's a witch hunter who's out for that bounty. Rose, who's a widow who wants to kind of escape her old life. Moses and Ned, two cowboys out on an adventure. And Rabbit, a strange child that Tom, the witch hunter, kind of brought under his wing. You follow this posse as they travel across this kind of weird west landscape. People join, people leave. They stumble across multitudes of freaky shit on the road. It's kind of hard to talk about the plot because it's really about the journey and the world, which feels very Wild West, but with these really cool and like very fitting horror elements. I like the idea of westerns, but I haven't read a lot because there aren't a lot actively coming out. It's kind of a dying genre, and I'm kind of like too woke for the old stuff, I fear. I actually read Lonesome Dove this year, and it was fine. I don't know. This had that western feel and the drama that I wanted, but the horror kind of spiced it up, plus it's a very diverse cast. The ending was also really great, kind of unusually hopeful maybe for a horror novel. I read the sequel, Rose of Jericho, which I was really excited for because I loved Red Rabbit and Moses in particular, who becomes the protagonist in Rose of Jericho. And it was just alright. I think the combination of uniqueness and surprise and being in the right place at the right time really made Red Rabbit a standout for me. Earthflown by Francis Wren. It took me a while to get to this book. I got it when it came out. I think I pre-ordered it, which I don't usually do, and I let it sit for like a year. And of course, immediately kicked myself for waiting because it was great. This is a queer sci-fi kind of dystopian with a strong romance plotline. This is a queer sci-fi with a strong romance plotline about Ethan, who's an overworked doctor who has healing abilities, and Javier, a powerful and wealthy heir whose sister Ethan saves, like in the hospital. In this world, clean water is a luxury, and there's a chemical used to purify it, but its sale is really closely controlled by a single corporation. And also some people have superpowers, and there's like corporate espionage, and it's illustrated. So there's a lot going on with this book. It's just kind of a delight to read. Despite all this stuff going on, it feels pretty straightforward. It's not convoluted. The romance is really sweet, and the sci-fi and action plotline is actually pretty high stakes, and you know, that makes for a good mix for me. It must be said that the illustrations are just gorgeous, and they really add to the vibe of the whole thing. Yeah, I think this is just what I needed when I read it, and I totally recommend it. Woodworking by Emily St. James. I went back and forth on putting this on the best list or the honorable mentions, and it ended up here because I really loved it in the moment, but I don't really know how much it stuck. This is a queer contemporary / literary novel about Erica Skyberg, who is 35, living in a small town in South Dakota, recently divorced, and has only just realized that she's a trans woman. Since the town leans really conservative, Erica only knows one other trans person, and she's one of her students, Annabelle Hawks. Together, they learn from each other and come to a greater understanding of themselves, and fight to find community in this town. I laughed, I cried, etc., etc. I like how complicated these characters are. Too often, queer main characters aren't allowed to be, like, unpleasant or messy for fear of being, like, bad representation, but Emily St. James does not hold back. Abigail is an absolute menace, for good reason, since she's young and she's been through a lot and kind of learned to strike first as a defense mechanism. Erica is just crippled by anxiety and shame and has to confront the fact that being who you are when who you are is trans is scary. Your existence is a rebellion against some people's sensibilities, whether or not you are a confrontational person. I don't want to spoil anything, but there are some arcs from other characters that also end up being like really impactful and heartbreaking, but it's also a really funny book. Like, there are some great one-liners, and of course it's that combination that I really enjoy. There is no Antimemetics division by QNTM. This was a recommendation from someone, and funnily enough, they actually recommended it just before it was basically wiped from the internet. It was originally released for free as a story within the SCP Foundation universe, which is kind of hard to explain, but it's an online kind of collaborative creative writing project about the secret foundation that houses oddities, strange and dangerous entities, kind of like an Area 51 kind of thing, but not really. The author then self-published it, and it was available that way for a few years, and then it got picked up for traditional publishing, and they scrubbed all of the SCP stuff. So this is a technically published fan fiction, or kind of adjacent to that. This is a sci-fi horror set in a department of the unknown organization, which is just the SCP Foundation. And this department is called the Antimemetics Division. There's also a Memetics Division, which deals with entities that involve like viral ideas. And the Antimemetics Division deals with entities that in some way repel detection, often by kind of continuously wiping people's memories. So you can be looking at something, but not see it, not because it's invisible, but because it's like actively erasing your perception of it. This book follows the head of the Antimemetics Division, Marie Quinn, through some of her day-to-day activities, and eventually her facing this like great looming threat. Clearly, this is kind of a challenging concept, but it's really fun to follow this idea of how to contain and catalog and protect people from entities that are invisible or constantly making you forget that they exist. It's definitely kind of a brain workout, but especially if you're already familiar with SCP Foundation, it's just a really cool book. I would recommend it even if you have no idea what SCP Foundation is, but also if you don't, like, look up SCP Foundation because it's awesome. The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, as I promised. Boy, do I have thoughts about this series. Good and bad, so this is going to be kind of half positive review, half rant. I apologize in advance. This is a historical fantasy series, maybe YA. It's kind of debatable. Set in 20th century China during the Second Sino-Japanese War, following Rin, who's a poor war orphan who manages to ace this exam that gains her entrance into an elite military academy. There, she's really an underdog, but one of the professors kind of takes special interest in her and starts training her in the art of shamanism, which is this magic that involves kind of channeling the power of gods. I really liked the first book in this series, almost enough to end up in my favorites. The start is great. It feels like a classic kind of YA fantasy with this poor underdog protagonist and an elite magic school, but when the war actually breaks out, there's this intense, crazy tonal shift. These children, because they are still children, who have been studying war kind of only in the abstract sense, are suddenly confronted with the reality, and it's so different from what they've learned, and there's nothing they could have done to prepare for it. It brings stakes to basically the games that they have been playing. I also like Rin the most in the first book because she's just feral and ambitious and does horrible things, and I like that in a character. Things just kind of go downhill for me in the second and third books. I'm going to do my best to avoid spoilers for this, but I feel like one of the takeaways from the first book was that every individual life is significant and irreplaceable, and war is this great evil because the deaths of thousands doesn't water down the value of those individuals. The value is only compounded. There's something that Rin does at the end of the first book, and if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. And I just feel like she never really gets confronted with it to the extent that she should. Like, she feels guilty, but I don't know. Several major characters also die throughout the series, and some of them are just hardly remarked upon. It's kind of ridiculous. They die, they're basically forgotten about for hundreds of pages. It also gets very repetitive. After like the 8th time that Rin begrudgingly trusts someone and gets betrayed, you'd really think she'd just stop. Especially because she's not like an inherently trusting person. And also every time someone warns her and she just ignores them. Rin's characterization didn't feel really poorly done to me until I read She Who Became the Sun. And then I was like, oh, how do we know Rin wants revenge and will do anything to get it? Because she says or thinks that, like every other page. You get it. The first book is great, and then, at least for me, it was kind of diminishing returns after that. So that's why it's here, but not in favorites. Cut and Run by Abigail Rue, and also the first few books are co-written with Madeline Urban. I read this 9-book series in like 2 weeks while I was recovering from surgery, and that is maybe the best way to read them. This is a queer romance slash buddy cop crime drama series about Ty and Zane, 2 FBI special agents that get paired up as partners despite not really liking each other, until, of course, they face their inevitable sexual tension. I don't like mysteries, but thankfully there's enough of a balance between the romance and the overarching plot across all the books, and then the mysteries in each book, that it was kind of fine. Ty and Zane are so fun and are totally the kind of couple you just always root for, even when they're being stupid, which is a lot of the time. The settings change a lot from book to book, and there are kind of different levels of internal and external conflict that keep things interesting. Ty has a whole messed up backstory. Both of them need to keep their relationship a secret or risk being split up as partners by the FBI. They're both kind of emotionally repressed. They're always being hunted down by someone. One or both of them are not out at different parts in the series. So there's always just kind of a lot going on. There's a fun cast of side characters as well. My top 3 from the series are Book 3, which is Fish and Chips, Book 5, which is Armed and Dangerous, and Book 1, Cut and Run. Yeah, if you just want to turn your brain off and enjoy something kind of wild and fun and quite smutty, this is it. Axiom's End by Lindsay Ellis. Lindsay Ellis is a YouTube video essayist, which I actually didn't know when I read this. I picked it up without being a fan of hers, which is weird because I watch so many YouTube video essays, but it was actually great. You know, that awkward moment when your insane conspiracy theorist dad claims that the government is covering up first contact with an alien species, but then he turns out to be kind of right. And also the aliens want you as their translator. This is an ongoing sci-fi series about basically what I just said. Cora is estranged from her conspiracy theorist dad, but ends up in his mess when she kind of accidentally forms a relationship with one of these aliens. Similar to Hench, this book has that balance that I really love between humor and really dark content. I was enjoying the first book, and then I got to one scene and was just giggling, and I realized how much fun I was having. But it definitely also gets pretty messed up, which I like. I didn't like the other 2 books as much, but I also read them after surgery and might not have really been in the headspace for it. So I'll give them another shot whenever the next book comes out. It's just got a lot of things that I love. You know, First Contact, language and linguistics, alternate history, alien-human relationships I really love, humor. It won't be for everyone. Reviews are quite mixed, but I really liked it. The Red Winter by Cameron Sullivan. This comes out February 26th, so almost certainly after this video is going to be posted, but I got an early copy. It's a queer historical fantasy standalone following Sebastian Grave, who is an immortal, and he recounts this hunt for a beast in the late 1700s in France and the love affair that he had with a barren son, leading him to throw himself in front of the danger time and time again. Sebastian shares his mind with, I guess it's pronounced Sarmadel probably, who is a demon that is partially there to just kind of spout bitchy one-liners and encourage Sebastian's lusts. And he also is a succubus for a housekeeper named Livia, who is a delight, although things get pretty grim when we actually get her POV. The romance between Sebastian and Antoine is great, not because it's really sweet and romantic, but because it's super messy, and as we know, I live for the drama. The world building is a lot of fun as well, and this is a standalone, but I think the author left room open for more books in this world, which is nice. The only critique I had is that I just don't really like battle scenes, and there were kind of a lot, especially towards the end, that went on for a while and broke some momentum for me. But who am I kidding? I need more of this bisexual mortal and his goofy demon comrades in my life. And this is a really impressive debut, so I'm excited to see what Cameron Sullivan does next, whatever it may be. The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. This is a contemporary lit fic that follows Rachel, who is a young woman who works in a bookstore as she meets her best friend and tries to make ends meet financially and eventually falls in love with one of her professors, which is never a boring turn for a story to take. Hilariously, Rachel's best friend and roommate is a gay man named James who works with her at the bookstore, and at one point she describes him as bookstore twink, which, that's me. James, the bookstore twink, that's me. Anyways, I think that this is a really good example of a book that isn't necessarily about identity and it's not a romance, but still feels like it's like about queerness, among other things. It also really captures kind of the feeling of young adulthood with all these codependent relationships and moments of desperation. It's not like never been done before, but it feels like it's treading a familiar path and just doing it really well. There's lots of humor and great emotional moments and some really tense bits, especially towards the end, but it's just really smooth and well packaged, and I enjoyed it a lot. Nothing Tastes as Good by Luc Dumas. This is another book I got as an early copy, and it's out March 31st. I read one of Luc Dumas's other books, A History of Fear, in February, and I liked it a lot, and this concept sounded interesting, so I requested a copy. This is a horror novel about Emmett, a young queer guy who has been struggling with his weight and binge-eating tendencies for basically his whole life. He enters a clinical trial for a new weight loss drug called Obexity, and it seems like a miracle cure. Sure enough, he starts losing weight rapidly, gaining fame online for his transformation, and worrying his loved ones, but the hunger never stops, and it's only getting worse. The obvious comparison for this book is The Substance, which I have not watched, but I was actually reminded of The Troop by Nick Cutter, in which a horrible parasite that antagonizes a Boy Scout troop originated as a weight loss drug. I'm sure we're all familiar with societal messaging around food and dieting, not to mention the rampant fat phobia in the media, and more crucially, in my opinion, among healthcare workers, and the rising popularity of weight loss drugs like Ozempic. With all of that in mind, you really can't blame Emmett for the choices he makes, even with the way that it turns out. Emmett's social media fame is also a really interesting addition, and you get to read his posts and comments from other people, which is a great way of breaking up the text. This is a satire to some extent, but I feel like a lot of the time, I think characters in satires end up being really flat, and Emmett feels like a person, like a well-intentioned and slightly annoying and quite traumatized person. But this was pretty great all around. Peter Darling by Austin Chant. Shout out to Aspen for recommending this. It had already been on my list, but I pushed it up because they said it was really good. We'll see if I can get through this with minimal giggling and blushing, because past me writing the script was fighting for my life. This is a queer romance / fantasy retelling of Peter Pan, in which Peter's a trans guy who returns to Neverland after escaping his family and finds out that Neverland has kind of chugged along without him, with the exception of Captain James Hook, who has been very bored without his rival. They restart their old war, and even as things get deadly, it's impossible to ignore the tension between them. This is just the kind of book that has you, like, kicking your feet and squealing. I know, because I'm doing it. There are so many, like, perfect moments, and the dynamic between Peter and Hook is, like, god-tier rivals to lovers. I can't even blame Peter for being, like, pinned to a wall with a knife at his throat thinking, like, this is kind of hot, because in this case he is so right. He's so correct. The ending's really sweet as well, and I like this take on the world building of Neverland a lot. It's really interesting. I think I would have liked more of a plot outside the romance, or maybe more engaging side characters. For a reason that I can't say because it's a spoiler, the side characters kind of aren't super consequential for the most part, but man, the romance is genuinely fantastic. There aren't a lot of books that nail the dynamic like this. Shy Girl by Mia Ballard. This was another book that I found out about and wanted to read when it was indie published, and then it immediately got picked up for traditional publishing, and I had to wait like a few months to read it. Unfortunately, you also have to wait for a few months because I got an early copy, and this will be out April 7th. This is a pretty extreme horror novel about Gia, a young woman in a bad spot, broke, lonely, out of options. When she signs up for a sugar daddy website in a last-ditch effort to avoid being evicted, on the site she meets Nathan, who seems kind of rich and unassuming in precisely the way that she needs, until he reveals the catch. She'll never have to worry about money again, as long as she agrees to be his dog for 8 hours a day. Like, sleep in a crate, wear a collar, walk around on hands and knees. This premise has lived rent-free in my head since I read a sample of the indie pub version. Gia has OCD, and I'm sure those of you out there with OCD or anxiety or depression know that sometimes it's just exhausting to be a person, to make the decisions every day and be responsible for yourself. So there is kind of a certain appeal to the idea of like giving up all of that control and not needing to think about anything ever. Similarly, except oppositely, being a control freak, I find the idea absolutely horrifying. I think the combination of those two feelings made me kind of obsessed with this concept. It's truly sickening at points. Definitely more extreme than I think some people will go in expecting. At every step of the way, you kind of watch Gia's desperation drive her to make insane decisions, but it also feels clear how much of the story is out of her hands for most of the book. I would never advise someone to do something like eating glass, but I understand why she does it when she does it, and I think that reflects well on the author's skill of like establishing all of these things that lead Gia to do these things. It also feels grounded in reality because it's really about power instilled by gender and class and race. No spoilers, but the end is great and satisfying in its own way. The moment you've all been waiting for is here. It's time to talk about the worst books I read this year. These aren't solely the books I enjoyed the least or like the worst written books I read, but they were all bad in some remarkable way or just really disappointing. There aren't a ton. Most of the bad books I read are just really boring. I also DNF'd, meaning that I didn't finish 7 books this year, but none of those are on this list. Unlike the other sections, this is actually roughly organized from least bad to most bad, and you are going to want to hear about the last one. Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. I actually did not read this in 2025, but it was the very last book that I read in 2024 on December 31st, so I'm going to say that it counts. This is a queer YA fantasy horror, very much in quotes, about 2 boys, Andrew and Thomas, who go to boarding school together. Andrew writes horror stories, and Thomas illustrates what he writes, and they're very close. When Andrew returns for his senior year, his twin sisters being kind of distant, and Thomas's parents have gone missing, and Thomas is being kind of cagey about it. So one night, Andrew follows Thomas into the forest and discovers what lurks there. This book is so strange to me because genuinely all of my Goodreads friends except one have given it 5 stars, and I just thought it was bad. The biggest issue I had was the writing, which is so like aggressively angsty and cringy. It is genuinely unreadable at some points. I'm not the arbiter of good writing. It's not usually something that I care that much about, but let me just read you some quotes. This is the first paragraph, genuinely. It hadn't hurt the day he had cut open his own heart. Andrew had written about it later in spidery lines from a sharp pen, a story about a boy who took a knife to his chest and carved himself open, showing his ribs like mossy tree roots, his heart a bruised and wretched thing beneath. No one would want a heart like his, but he'd still cut it out and given it away. Shoot me. Like, sorry. Actually, like, why? The whole book is like this, by the way. Here's more quotes. But his ribs were a cage for monsters, and they cut their teeth on his bones. If you cut open my chest, Andrew's voice was wrecked. You'll find a garden of rot where my heart should be. This was what Andrew did. Told stories, ones with dark, bitter corners and magic curled into thorns. One with monsters and with elegant, razor-like teeth. He wrote fairy tales, but cruel. Okay, that's not. Imagine a whole book of that. It's so bad. It doesn't help. The writing's bad. It doesn't help that Andrew and Thomas have like an established relationship at the start of the book, which we don't really see. We don't get to see this devotion building, so it just comes off so forced with this really like really lyrical writing. The horror elements are very minimal and not particularly original. I think publishing has gotten a little fast and loose with the horror label and just kind of started and calling anything with vaguely spooky elements horror. But this is not horror in my book. It's YA fantasy with light horror elements written in the style of angsty 2012 Tumblr poetry. Genuinely just disappointing. Caught Up by Nevessa Allen. This is the second book in a series, and the first book was so good and so fun, and then this just lost everything that made me like the first book. This is a dark romance about Lauren, a sex worker and an OF model, and Junior, who is a member of the mob, and he's known Lauren since they were kids, and he kind of becomes fixated on her, despite fearing that he or his work will put her in danger. The first book, Lights Out, is a self-aware stalker romance with just so much great humor and heart. The love interest, Josh, is a freak, but he's also so cute and again self-aware. And the romance in that book works because as much as Josh is a freak, Allie is somehow more of a freak and is totally into it. Junior in Caught Up sucks. Junior is so arrogant and also volatile in a way that is like genuinely unsettling, like not fun and hot and crazy, like scary. Lauren is just a normal person who has a job that she enjoys and has found friends in the kink spaces, all of which are really healthy, about boundaries and consent. This kind of paints it as if Lauren, being just a normal person and also a sex worker, it makes her as crazy as Junior being like a mafia hitman. It's just a dark romance without the self-awareness and humor, which just makes it a worse book with like a really strong I can fix him dynamic. Like there's literally a quote where Lauren is like, I can save him. I like the pro-sex work messaging and Lauren fighting for safe kink spaces because that is really important. And there are some scenes that I like in isolation, but fuck Junior, man. Side tangent, many of the negative reviews on this book have no problem with Junior, but instead are mad that this book is too woke because it is pro-sex work and also has one non-binary side character. If you are a dark romance reader and therefore are in favor of sexual freedom and judgment-free spaces, but you are against sex work and you're queerphobic, you're an idiot. Furthermore, if you like reading kinky romances and you're queerphobic, bad news, the kink community is overwhelmingly queer, but this book also sucked. Victorian Psycho by Virginia Fado. This one's just stupid. Victorian Psycho is supposedly a historical horror novel set in the Victorian era, and it follows Winifred, a woman who comes to this big manor to be a governess for the wealthy family's children. Winifred, however, has a hell of a history, and as she learns more about the family she's serving, it becomes harder to fight off her dark impulses. I don't know what the point of this book is. It feels like the author thought of the title, like, ooh, Victorian Psycho, American Psycho, but Victorian, and the thinking process ended there. The allusion to American Psycho and kind of the jokes in this book lead you to think that this is satire, but I don't know what it's supposed to be satirizing. There's kind of a half-assed attempt to make it about misogyny, which would make sense for the era, but it's not like Winifred gets treated badly and that causes her to snap. She shows up to the manor crazy and remains a pretty consistent level of crazy throughout. The book shows dark parts of the era, but that's not like challenging public beliefs or saying anything new. I said that this is supposedly horror because this to me is so cheap that it's not horror anymore. The extent of the horror in this book is just like violence with no purpose and gore, and these like extremely cringy descriptions. Since Winifred is crazy, she describes everything in like gross ways. She's like, this is a quote, "The dress was a lovely pink, like lamb's brains." And that's just constant throughout the whole book. It's almost funny, but it's like mostly stupid. Another one, "Leaves are strewn across the grounds in hues of bile and blood." Like, okay, so fall leaves? I don't know. I don't know. It doesn't matter to me that Winifred is crazy and kills everyone, because there's nothing for me to take away from that. If you like slashers and have a high tolerance for reading something that's disturbing and unusual with no actual, like, narrative or thematic payoff, I guess read this. I don't know. Devolution by Max Brooks. This one was actually really disappointing. I thought I was gonna like it, but there were some little issues, and then there were some big issues. This is a sci-fi horror / thriller. I would put it in the thriller category, about this little kind of eco-community in the forests around Mount Rainier that's supposed to be kind of immersed in nature, but also have all of the conveniences of modern technology. It's called Green Loop. When Mount Rainier erupts, it drives this hidden population of Sasquatch out of their homes near the mountain, and they end up running into and kind of battling with the eco community. It's all told through interviews and journal entries and stuff, which is a format I really like, so I was excited. We'll start with the small issues, one of which is just that there isn't like actually that much to this story. The eruption happens, the Sasquatches come, Green Loop, fights with them. There aren't like any twists. The subtitle of the book kind of gives away how their battle turns out, and the characters are just really lackluster. There aren't really any interesting conflicts or dynamics. So the whole thing is like weirdly boring considering the premise. There are also a lot of things that are mentioned that really seem like they're supposed to come back up and totally don't somehow. Kate, the writer of the journal, is keeping the journal as a therapy exercise, but that gets like kind of like immediately forgotten in the narrative. It doesn't seem like a therapy journal. She also says something about having OCD, but it's never mentioned again. It's mentioned that she has some like scar or like a knot, like maybe nerve damage or something running from her neck to her arm. That, I don't know what, that's not mentioned. It's like, that seems like it means something, yeah? She's also there with her husband, but at one point remarks that she's attracted to the founder of Green Loop. That's never mentioned again. I thought for sure it would because, at least cheating, I don't really care about it, but it would have been something happening. Now for the bigger issues. Dare I say, problematic issues. One, which isn't huge, but it is just weird, is that there's a character in the community who is kind of like vaguely foreign. Kate thinks that she might be Russian or Israeli, and later the character mentions growing up around Serbia and Croatia, so we can assume she's from somewhere in the Balkans. For some reason that's never explained, this character can talk to the Sasquatches, so I guess Sasquatches speak Bosnian or something? I don't know. I was like, did I miss something? But no, she can just talk to them. No one else can. It's just her. If anything, the Sasquatches should speak English. They just live in Washington State. The second thing, and this is the biggie, randomly between the interviews and the journal entries, we get one singular flashback from this guy, Reinhardt, in which he's arguing with his sister, who is in the IDF, even though she's American, which also that's not explained. And she's arguing that Israel needs to fight back against their enemies, and Reinhardt disagrees, for which she basically calls him a coward. Reinhardt, in like the next scene, sorry, spoilers, dies because he isn't willing to stand up to the Sasquatches. And for those following the metaphor, Brooks decided to compare this battle between humans and half-ape monsters to the conflict between Israel and Palestine, or the other countries around Israel, in which Israel is analogous to the humans and Palestine is analogous to the Sasquatches, who are literal inhuman monsters. Why? You could just take that scene out and the book would be no different, except it wouldn't be that. It is so out of place and so like pointedly included. This book came out in 2020, which is before the recent outbreak of war, but it's such a kind of glaringly not great detail to include, so I'm not a fan. The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This book makes me angry. I don't usually like murder mysteries, so I don't read them, but I read The Last Murder, The End of the World by this author in like 2024, and I liked it. And this is the book that he's best known for, and there's a sci-fi element. and I like time loops, so I thought I'd give it a shot. Big mistake. This is a murder mystery with sci-fi elements about this man, Aidan Bishop, who wakes up in someone else's body and comes to learn that he has 8 days to solve the murder of this woman, Evelyn Hardcastle, and 8 witnesses' bodies that he will inhabit to do so. Good premise, kind of time loopy, which I like when it's done well, which it isn't here. But this book is just everything that I cannot stand about murder mysteries. There's the peripheral world building about why Aidan has to solve this murder that is interesting, but it's only briefly mentioned and it's not like explained at all. It's like 3 pages out of like a 450-page book. All of the other characters, the characters are all annoying. Not a single one is like at all compelling or interesting to read about. There are either massive plot holes in this book or just like scenes missing somehow. You would think 8 days and 8 bodies, Aidan would be in one body each day, but he like flashes between them in a way that's confusing and like seems to follow some rules, but it's really not clear. If one body dies, he'll go into another. If one body goes to sleep, he'll also go into another. At like certain times of day, you can't go into a body if it has already died, because the day is resetting each day. It's not 8 concurrent days. It's the same day over and over. So if he's in body 1 dies at 8 a.m., then from that point on in the rest of the day, if he dies in another body or sleeps, he will not go back to that body. But if he does beforehand, he can't. I'm like, it's so convoluted, and it does not need to be. This does not serve like the plot really significantly for him to be in all of these bodies. Like, it does not do much. I would also be remiss not to mention that one of the bodies that Aidan inhabits is an overweight man, and the fat phobia with which this character is described is insane. And it makes the whole sections where Aidan's either in that body or is just like in the room with that character when he's in a different body, like borderline unreadable. This guy is lazy, he's a creep, he's a slob, and it's horrendous and ridiculous because, like, this character is no better or worse than any of the other characters. They all suck, but he's the only one who gets this treatment. I think the author addressed this and said that the fat phobia was totally unintentional, which is, like, almost worse. I don't know how you write about a character this way and just not notice. Also, like, the mystery was stupid. The big reveal happens, and I'm like, it was blank the whole time. I'm like, I don't know who that is. Like, maybe I'm just stupid. I don't know. I'm like, I cannot. If you say the reveal and I can't put together the puzzle pieces of how you got there, I feel like it's a bad twist. Cardinal Sin also, it was just boring. I don't know how or why I finished this, but do not waste your time just because I did. Now, for my worst book of the year, and I have to be honest, nothing else even came close. Pioneer Summer by Elena Melasova and Katerina Silvanova. There's a story behind this one. I'm currently studying Russian in college, and in the spring of 2025, my professor was gone for a few days to go to a conference. When he came back, he told us he had been on a panel about a popular book in Russia. The book in question was Pioneer Summer, the Russian version, which has actually a slightly different title. I mean, it's in Russian, but it also translates differently. And this book was a queer romance about 2 boys at a Soviet pioneer camp that had originated as a self-published work on fanfic.net. It's not a fanfic, but it's an original work that was posted on fanfiction.net, which is already like the worst fanfiction site. The story got traditionally published in Russia and got so popular that it prompted like a massive crackdown on queer literature in Russia, like tons of new book bannings. Already, I'm sure you know that the current government in Russia is really strict about censoring queer media. My professor said that the book was being translated into English and published in the US in summer of 2025, and kind of vaguely alluded to not liking it, but when I saw it on NetGalley, I was like, I kind of have to read it now. Okay, James, what is it actually about? This is a queer historical romance, and it follows Yura, a boy who has spent his summers at Camp Barnswallow, which is a Soviet pioneer camp. If you don't know, during the Soviet era, they had these pioneer camps that were summer camps / nationalist indoctrination operations for Soviet children. Yura, now 16, meets the new troop leader, Volodya, and The forbidden flame that arises between them will follow them many years into the future. I don't know why I wrote my review like that, but that was my summary in my review. There are so many issues with this book, but I do feel the need to preface this by saying that I actually love fanfic, and I'm fully in favor of the recent trend of traditionally published fan fiction. I think it's really cool. I've read fanfic, I've written it. Sad gay Russian romance actually sounds up my alley. I didn't go into this expecting to hate it. Most importantly, this book commits the sin of simply being so boring. It's about 450 pages, and I easily could have cut it in half. One entire chapter is about 20 pages of a play-by-play of this like crappy show that like the campers put on that no one cares about. There are a whole bunch of bits about Yura making up scary stories to make the campers behave. This happens several times, and you have to hear each story in full, and they have no bearing on the plot, and they're all like super long. It's so tedious and long-winded, and the writing is so awkward. In my original review, I wondered if that was a result of the translation, because that happens sometimes. But one of my Goodreads friends, who's a native Russian speaker, had read the book in Russian and said that the original was not any better. You may have caught in the summary I said that Yura falls in love with his camp counselor. Maybe that made you pause. Yura is 16 and Volodya is 18, which isn't the worst age gap ever, but Yura is insanely childish. He is called childish by many characters and remains childish throughout the whole book. I don't think the age gap would be a big deal, but Yura doesn't act 16. He acts 12, which makes for a really uncomfortable dynamic. Volodya just acts like an adult. Volodya is also pretty neurotic, which generally I think is valid, kind of given that this was not a good time to be in the Soviet Union at all, and especially not to be gay, but it makes him feel very one note. All the female characters are either crazy, whiny, or like generally useless, so that's not great considering this is a gay romance written by women, which kind of is giving some misogyny energy. Generally, all the other characters are totally inconsequential. It's probably not even worth learning their names. If you aren't used to Russian naming conventions, it will be a big relief not to try and learn people's names, because every character gets referred to variably by their full first name, like Vladimir or Yuri. They're shortened names, like Volodya, which is the shortened form of Vladimir. Yura is the shortened form of Yuri. Diminutives, like Volodka or Yorka. Their last names or their patronymics. So all those can refer to the same character or different characters. Good luck keeping track. There's also just some poor messaging around queerness. Volodya mentions that his gay sexual awakening was his cousin. Weird parallel to draw between homosexuality and incest, but hey, The Secret History did that too, and people like that book, so, whatever. Yura and Volodya later mentioned disliking flamboyant or feminine gay men, and that's never challenged or really examined, that's really icky. There's a bit of a self-harm narrative, but it's really there for no reason. There's not a purpose for it. There's a brief non-graphic sex scene that, despite being non-graphic, made me high-key nauseous. Maybe just because, as mentioned, this feels like a relationship between a very young boy and an adult man. I will always be against censorship, and it's kind of admirable that this book was published and became very popular despite queer censorship in Russia. Obviously, to have inspired this huge rise in book bannings, the book must have resonated with some people, including probably queer people. I just wish there was anything good about it. Just absolute garbage. Shout out to my poor Russian teacher who had to read it too. That's it. Hell of a year, 2025. Maybe not my best reading year, but I found a lot of new books to love and shove into people's faces at all opportunities. Hopefully 2026 brings more favorites for me and for you. I'm recording this a little ways into 2026, and I've already read some great stuff. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have read any of the books I've mentioned or end up reading them based on this video, do let me know. If you want to keep up with what I'm reading, I update Goodreads very regularly, and that will be in the description. I'd like to make videos other than the yearly wrap-up, but at the very least, I will see you next year to talk about what I read in 2026. See you then.